Great. Hello, everyone. We're going to try to start on time to keep on schedule. I am from Spain, and this is very bad time because it's the time when we normally have siesta. So I don't want you to have siesta. I don't want you to have a nap. And that's why I'm going to start by asking you a very simple question. Are you interested in data? Right. Great. Thank you for the spirit. Thank you for showing me that you are not robots, or that you're robots that reply very fast to my questions, and that you're not having a nap for sure. I wanted to ask you this question, which has a very obvious answer when we're in a conference like this, to show you how easy it is to get leaked data today. That question, hello, are you interested in data, was the question that kickstarted the biggest leak in journalism history. Before, in journalism, we used to depend on other type of things, not just questions over a message. We used to depend on a photocopying machine, like what happened in the Pentagon Papers, this famous leak of this Vietnam War report that had to be photocopied. I think it was around 7,000 pages in this report. And we depended on a photocopying machine to get it copied, and then for those records, for those papers to be shipped to the reporters. Later, in other scandals, like the Watergate scandal, we also depended on physically meeting the person. This is a screenshot from the movie All the President's Men. You may remember it, the Watergate scandal. So these Washington Post reporters meeting with Deep Throat in a parking lot so that they could get these very interesting documents and information connected to President Reagan. Today, it just is connected to something that you may receive, a hard drive you may receive by mail. Somebody may ship you information. You may receive very sensitive information from corporations attached into an email. And it's not receiving information, inside information about companies or about other institutions. It's not just connected to what we do in journalism. As you see here in the screen, there are other examples of other leaks or other leaks connected to hacks that just reach the internet. Today, anybody can have private information and upload it directly to the internet. So I'm going to tell you today the story of how we worked with the biggest leak in journalism history, which, as I was telling you, started with this question. And of course, we also answered, yes, we're very interested in data. That turned out to be the beginning of a long story that ended up having a great impact in the world. And it was known as the Panama Papers. I hope that you're here because you've heard of it. If not, I'm going to tell you in a nutshell what it is. But the question was posed to these reporters that you see here in Süddeutsche Zeitung. It's a newspaper in Germany. I don't know how many of you are readers of Süddeutsche Zeitung. Any readers here? Well, one person, right? If those two reporters had only received that leak by themselves and had published it, just one person in the room would have understood what the story was. The story, or what they had received, was leaked information from a Panamanian law firm called Mossack Fonseca, who basically was doing incorporating companies in offshore jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands, like Singapore, like Cayman Islands, for clients around the globe, more than 200 countries. So something that is very big and that is being done by one of the leading firms in the world, and that is helping people basically fund the war in Syria, do crimes hidden, or that is also helping, people evade taxes, would have been only known by that gentleman that raised his hand because he reads Süddeutsche Zeitung. Instead of just keeping the information to themselves, what they did was to share it with the company I work for, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. We're a very small company. We're a media organization that I would say we're a startup. We're just 12 people. And out of those 12 people that you see there, 3 of them are developers. With these 3 developers and this great team, we managed to convince more than 100 media organizations to work with us on this big leak of information. And we managed to work in secret for a year on this leaked information about this Panamanian law firm that exposed like never before how the offshore world worked. This is what we had to deal with. To the right was the data from the Panama Papers. We were dealing with 2.6 terabytes. Some of you may think and may say, well, it's not that much. For us, it was a lot. If you see to the left, it's basically what we were dealing with before in previous leaks. This is more than 10 times higher to what we had been dealing with before. So immediately, the main challenge was technological, right? And we also had a challenge of how do we get all these reporters together to work on this data. After working over a year, basically the story ended up being that we exposed how the offshore economy has a great impact in our societies. It has impact in taxes that are not being paid, therefore services that are not being done, education, hospitals, roads. It has an impact on the inequality that our societies live in and the growing inequality that we're seeing. I don't know if you've seen how many homeless people you have here in San Francisco and how the number of homeless people is growing. Well, that's connected to what we had discovered. And we exposed how systematic was the use of offshore companies. Systematic because it was used by businessmen, it was used by celebrities, it was used by sports people, and it was used by many, many, many politicians. Politicians like the Prime Minister of Iceland that had not declared a company in the British Virgin Islands. And what we had and all the impact that we received later was just by exposing the tip of the iceberg. We had 2.6 terabytes, data for around 40 years, one company in Panama out of the thousands of companies that do this worldwide. What we ended up doing was exposing the information all together in April 3rd, 2016, publishing in different media organizations, not only Süddeutsche Zeitung, but more than 100 media organizations, and it ended up causing a wave, and hopefully all of you heard around that time about the Panama Papers. Other people also heard about it and reacted differently because a lot of people were exposed. And right now, there are changes that are happening thanks to the work that we did as journalists and the stories that we published. The Prime Minister of Iceland that I was telling you that had a company offshore and that had not declared had to resign a few days after we published. There are investigations right now. This is a photo from a few weeks ago from my colleagues speaking at the European Parliament that is doing an investigation using the information that we had published. There are tax agencies looking at the information that we had published to recover taxes, and there are legislative changes that will be long-lasting. All this was done by analyzing 2.6 terabytes of data and working together, 400 journalists in around 80 countries. But it was just the beginning, or just one example of the world we're living in. A few months later, just a month ago, we published a new leak that it was called Bahamas Leak. I don't know if you've heard about it because it wasn't very heard of here in the US, but in Europe, what caused big waves. We had a different leak with similar data. Thanks to the work that we had done, we were able to connect the dots and find a former vice president of the European Commission that had not declared her ties to a company in the Bahamas. Or, for example, the Home Secretary of the UK that had not done the same. Let me tell you that what we exposed and what I'm telling you about here is the story of a secret system that is perfectly legal. What we exposed and what we had access to was data from a company that was doing, apparently, legal things, creating companies in a different jurisdiction. But as I was saying, those companies enable crime. Those companies enable financing of terrorism. Some of those companies enable trafficking of weapons. And that is the problem. So using technology, we tried to expose this, and crafts were instrumental in how we tried to do the investigation and how we're trying to get you to investigate. By the way, there will be a movie, so hopefully we'll see what happens in the future with this, and they get to put it in the movie. But for now, let me tell you that I think we got lucky. Not only we got lucky because we got a great set of data to work on, We also got lucky because it was the right time in history to deal with this set of data. We got lucky because technology was there to help us investigate this. If you remember from the beginning of my presentation, I was talking to you about the Pentagon papers and those photocopied papers that had to be shifted through by reporters. In that case, it was around 7,000 pages. Reporters are patient. We can read those. But what do we do with 11.5 million documents? We're patient people, but maybe not that patient, right? So technology was here to help us do several things. But also, we were lucky because the National Security Agency was not our threat. When we started looking at the data and we looked at what we had in front of us, we decided that we could use cloud-based technologies to help us investigate. Because even though I hope the NSA did not spy on us and we did everything we could to protect us, as we've seen, the NSA spies on everybody. But if the NSA basically, spied on us, it wasn't such a big deal. So we took that. Oh, that's a red cross in my screen. But anyway, but basically, we after doing the threat modeling analysis, we basically decided that we could use cloud-based technologies to collaborate. The scenario that we had in front of us was that I have very, very different users. On one hand, I have reporters that are, what I would describe as the Watergate type reporter that basically has investigated the president, knows everything about everybody, has everything in her head, but maybe is not very good with technology. And on the other hand, I have developers in my team, I have people that know all about the data, and that would look and shift through these 2.6 terabytes, very easily. So every time we decide what to do next, we need to have that in mind and see how we can deal with our users, right? So when we chose the technology to collaborate, to shift through these terabytes of data, we had to have in mind that there are some people that don't know what a query is. What we did was try to adapt technologies from other fields that could apply to our world. So for example, we said, we need to communicate. How do people communicate? Through social networks. Well, let's get our own social network and apply it to investigative journalism. It's like investigative dating, right? And we applied Oxwell, which is an open source platform, to install it in our servers so that we could communicate among each other and share the leads. We looked at software that would allow us to shift through documents, and we found this software, again, open sourced, called Blacklight, that was meant for libraries and the exploration of books. I don't know if any of you are former students from Columbia University, but in Columbia University, for example, they have this to go through their book catalog. Well, we used Blacklight not for searching books, but for searching the documents, so that reporters from anywhere in the world, anytime, could go through the documents, download them, and investigate. But the reality is that what we were dealing with was pretty complex. This was the universe behind Mossack Fonseca, this Panamanian law firm that we didn't know anything about. It had a complete universe of people connected to companies, people connected to intermediaries, people connected to addresses that we had to shift through. And what it looked like when we analyzed the files was something like this. We had a lot of emails, we had a lot of PDFs and images that we had to process, and it took us a long time, but we also had a database that, if you see there, I don't put database, I say database files, so we received kind of like the deconstructed version of the database that we had to reconstruct again, but ended up being graph material. And that's what we did. After we got those files, again, around the fourth of the leak was database files. We reconstructed them, and what we did was started to connect the dots, right? And connecting those people with those companies and with those addresses through the coding system that was already in the database. But instead of going with a relational database, we decided to go with a graph database because it's the natural way we represent this. If a person and a company are connected, and then there's an address, that is a graph. We used software Linkurious. Maybe some of you have heard about it. I think they're there with a stand. We really liked it because it was very simple and very easy to use. I don't know if you remember that at the beginning I said that we're a startup. And I don't know if you remember that I said we only have 3 developers. So when we decide on software, we really need to go with things that are cheap, things that are easy to use, if possible, open source, and also that we can plug it in and get it up and running without a lot of process. So what Linkurious allowed us to do was to install the software in our server, plug a Neo4j database, and that's it. It's visualized there. It has also, an admin panel so that users could log in with their username and password, and you could save visualizations, you can share them among the users, etc. But I have to say that the most fascinating things was it allowed my non-tech savvy reporters to explore graphs in a very natural way. Their very natural way was expanding dots. They don't even talk about nodes. They just talk about expanding dots. Anybody can expand a dot, right? And get connections. Well, that's how we started finding connections that we had not found before. And feeling a bit like having superpowers. Because actually that was the reaction of my team. When we started visualizing the data into graphs, they felt like it was magic. And I'm not making this up. I'm not saying this because we're in a Neo4j conference. I'm telling you the truth. They felt that they could investigate people and the connections like never before. Basically, the first reaction was, wow, I click on dots and I find connections and I find stories that I had missed before. One thing that they really liked also about Linkurious and the software that we were showing them was that it also suggested the names. So it has a fuzzy matching section. So for example, a Finnish reporter would tell me, hey, I entered the name, and because Finnish names or Nordic names have a similarity, she actually found more people. Very useful also the already default find shortest path option that you can use without having to do any query. And just with that, my users were satisfied, but at least most of my users. But on the other end, I was telling you, I have developers, I have people that know how to write queries. And the good thing about Linkurious is that it allowed them to write queries too and explore the data, finding real patterns of what was happening. Other features that we really liked about working with graphs and about working with Linkurious was that it allowed us to have public widgets. So even though the platform was private, you could publish a visualization and embed it in your work, in your story, in your blog, and show the world how graphs work. And it also had an API that we later used for a database that I'm going to show you. This is an example of how we used the widget when the database was private. This is an interactive that we did to show the politicians in the data. And you could click on the Prime Minister of Iceland and see his connections to offshore, his and his wife's connections to offshore. And through the API, we were able to then tap into the API and build a public-facing website called the Offshore Leaks database that anybody can log into. This is the Offshore Leaks database. It's public since May 9th. And anybody can go in here and just type in any name and find somebody. So let me type in a name that ended up yielding results. Somebody typed Emma Watson. I figure some of you know who she is. Actually, let me do it with quotation marks. And somebody typed in Emma Watson at the Times of London and found the story because Emma Watson, the actress of Harry Potter, for those of you that don't know, was connected. There was an Emma Watson connected to a London address and connected to a BVI company incorporated in September 2013. And by exploring the graph and exploring the entities and exploring other people with a similar name. I don't know if you see Emma Charlotte Duer Watson, which is her real name. They were able to confirm through also lookup of the addresses in corporate registries that it was her. So we wanted that the world could investigate with us. We couldn't publish all the data. We couldn't publish the 11.5 million files. We published the graph database of the clients of Mossack Fonseca. And thanks to being it public, we were able to get the world to find stories that we had missed. This database is built with Neo4j in the background, and it had a lot of success. Let me give you some figures that we got of visits since May 9th. We got 7.4 million sessions, so more than 7 million people visited the website and explored the data through graphs. Probably many of them don't know how to write Cypher queries. We got more than 44 million page views. We got top visitors from these countries. The US was very active, Japan, Spain, Canada, and the UK. And many were entering through the country filter that I'll show you in a second. But does anybody want to guess who is among the top search terms? What? Yay! So, award for you afterwards. So Donald Trump is actually, people are very concerned about Donald Trump having offshore accounts. I'm sorry, he's not in the leak. But you can keep searching. A lot of people go inside here and just basically explore the data by looking at their country. So they would basically go in here and say, show me all the addresses for the United States, or all the names, connected to the United States. And then they would go in here and keep looking at the names, which is not very handy when you have 6,000 entities connected to the United States. This is basically how our graph model looks like. It's very simple. In the end, it's what I was telling you. We have companies that we called entities because it could also be trusts and foundations. So entities. We have officers, which is normally people, but also companies connected to those entities as directors, shareholders, beneficiaries. We also have addresses connected to the different people. And then we also have intermediaries that are normally law firms or banks that enable the system. And you would be able to explore 1 million nodes and around 4.5 million relationships at the moment. So we're here in San Francisco, and on top of looking at the most search terms and seeing that Trump is not there, probably you may be wondering, so who's using Offshore in San Francisco? You can also do that. You can go to the database and say, okay, show me all the names. San Francisco. Show me all the nodes that contain the word San Francisco. And as you see there, you'll be able to see that there are 12 entities, 2 officers, and 222 addresses. So through our website, which I'm very proud of, by the way, having more than 7 million people visited since May, you would have to go to the addresses, and let's look at this. I'm not from San Francisco, so I'm picking the first one. Nothing against this. You would see Waller Street, and you would see Thomas Armitage connected to Waller Street, connected to a company in the Seychelles, and you get the idea. You could keep exploring, expanding the dots, right? But, given that we are at a Graph Connect conference, and that I'm sure that many of you, or most of you, are not like my users and don't want to expand dots one by one, what I would suggest is that if you're really excited, and whether it's the first time you use Neo4j and you hear about Neo4j, or whether you're a very experienced user, you actually download the data in Neo4j. It's very simple. You just go to the database and go to the download section. The database is published in a Creative Commons with a Creative Commons license, so anybody can use it, and it's downloadable in CSV. It's also downloadable in Neo4j. So basically, you just have to click on Windows or Mac. That downloads a package. Here, you would need to unzip it, and you would open it, and you get the idea. Launch Neo4j. The good thing about the package that we have there that is downloadable is that it has two things in one, which is Neo4j with the data already imported. So you don't even have to worry about importing the data. And something else that is pretty cool about what we have is that it has great guides telling you about the data, telling you about the data model, and also suggesting some investigative queries that would allow you to either learn Neo4j or think about what you can do with this data. So for example, you could try to search for addresses, but I'm a beginner in Cypher. Will Lion in the back is teaching me, and I'm still learning. But if I could go here and I could just look at the guide and say, okay, I want to query by address, and actually let me query San Francisco. I don't even have to write the Cypher query. And let's say USA. Let me load it here, and I could explore the data. Again, I didn't go through the unzipping and opening because it would take some seconds, but in seconds you could have the Offshore Leaks database in your laptop and work with it. And by looking at it, of course, you get a different picture, right? And all of a sudden, even just by exploring it, visually, very quickly, like I'm doing here in this presentation, you can already see a potential interesting story, right? Which is these people here that are connected to a lot of entities. It's called American Corporate Services, Inc., with the address in 2076 16th Avenue in San Francisco. Wow, they're pretty active, right? At least in the creating companies or connecting to companies offshore in the data that we had in the leak. And you can do that with the data very easily, and you can keep exploring because I'm pretty sure we've missed a lot of stories, and we're still to find some more. You see the difference, You see the difference between having to go one by one. We can keep exploring the data differently by having it, in our computer and being able to explore it through Cypher. So I actually encourage you to download it and do a lot of Cypher queries. And please tell me if you find something very interesting and you end up finding Trump. Maybe he's there and we've missed him. Actually, if you end up calling, and looking at the graph model, it's a bit more complex than the simple one that I showed. The data is dirty. I'm sorry. It's the way it came to us. We had to publish it how it came to us because of legal reasons. And that also meant that there are a lot of types of relationships that have not been standardized. That also means there are a lot of names that could be duplicates. That also means that addresses have not been cleaned up. So of course, if you work, for example, in a bank that has to report back to the financial institution in the UK, because they've actually requested banks to look themselves in the Panama Papers, you may have to do some work cleaning the data, because that's the way it was maintained by Mossack Fonseca, or, by the way, by other companies that we have included in the leak, because in here, it's not only that we have Mossack Fonseca, we also have other intermediaries like from other leaks or from the Bahamas leaks. So you can actually explore 500,000 offshore companies thanks to this database. Again, online, please go online and give us visits, but also offline if you can, if you want to explore it through graphs. A lot of people come to me and tell me, wow, what you've done is impressive. It's impressive what you've done because we achieved great impact. It's impressive what we've done with such a small tech team. But let me tell you a secret. Now that a few of you only are listening, we have barely scratched the surface. We managed to adapt some of the technology that is out there, with the small team that we have, but there's still a lot to do. And that worries me. That worries me as a citizen. That worries me as a journalist. Because my to-do list is very, very long. We barely did graph analysis, even though we had the data in graphs. We didn't do entity extraction. We didn't do email pattern analysis. We didn't do any of these things that are so common to some of you. There are many reasons why we're not doing this. But, let me actually go back. But the biggest reason, many times, is that us journalists are not as rich as corporations. And we have to be the watchdog of corporations. We have to be the watchdog of governments. We have to be the watchdog of criminals. And we just can't keep up. So I wanted to make my shameless plug to my organization, because we're actually a not-for-profit organization. We did this out of the donations of people like you. We did this out of donations of big corporations, foundations, and out of big philanthropists. So if you like the work that we did, if you want us journalists to keep being the watchdogs of society, us or other journalists, I would encourage you to help us with our work. Because wouldn't it be great to have recommendations like the ones that Amazon gives us? These are some recommendations that Amazon gave me a few days ago when I was going to look for things. And I don't know if there's anybody from Amazon in the room. I'm a bit annoyed at the recommendations because I'm not going to buy a vacuum cleaner and I'm not going to buy hair removal. But hey, Amazon suggested me to buy hard drives, and I've had to buy a lot of hard drives. So a little bit in the past years. So a little bit of, a little bit of targeted information it gave me. But wouldn't it be great to have systems like this, so that if I search a document and I found the Prime Minister of Iceland, the system would tell me, maybe you might be interested in finding the President of Argentina. Or maybe you may be interested in finding this corrupt person that is actually helping fund the war in Syria. This is, I think, where we need to go. This is where, hopefully, again, help with people like you, or help with people like you through other ways. We are collaborating with Neo4j. We're collaborating with Linkurious. We work with other software companies that donate their software for us, that they help us with our queries. They help us with our challenges. So there's also other ways. Because I hope that with all this collaboration with the tech community, with you guys, we can stop playing bingo. Because I think that right now what we're doing, and as big of an impact as we had with the Panama Papers, as great of a story it was, as many politicians as we had resign, it was just luck that drove us here. Because a lot of the use that we did of technology and of the analysis that we did was just by making searches, but trying to see whether we got lucky. And I think that in order to keep being watchdogs of society, we need to stop playing bingo, be less lucky through the help of technology. With that, I'll leave it to questions. Thank you.
I'm curious whether you fed in lists of people and their family members and that kind of stuff to try to figure out these hits.
That was not in my to-do list. We did that. One of the features, most requested features by our users, by our journalists, was, hey, I don't want to type in one name one by one in the database. I want to have the list of all my politicians and see if any of them are mentioned in the Panama Papers. In the search engine that I was showing you to look for documents, we actually built in a function that was basically upload a CSV. It matched across this 11.5 million files. It gave you a CSV back with the results that were matched, right? So if any of those names appear in the documents, it could appear as exact or with proximity matching. We didn't do fuzzy matching. We did proximity matching only. But there is one problem, which is, first, that the data is very dirty, and second, that there are a lot of false positives. So we still required humans to go through the records. So what it would happen, for example, I'm from Spain. The Prime Minister of Spain, Mariano Rajoy, was mentioned more than 50 times. So it would give us a hit. But then we would have to go and shift through the documents to see whether those documents were meaningful, and none of them, in my case, ended up being meaningful. So there were a lot of false positives to go through.
So are you working on any current new projects, interesting, that you can tell us about?
Right, yeah. So let me tell you again that we worked in secret for a year for the Panama Papers. Well, we just published Bahamas Leaks, which was 175,000 companies from the Bahamas, incorporated in the Bahamas, and the people behind them. It was some work because we had to do investigations. We had to add it to the database, which was pretty easy, given that we had the database already structured in Neo4j. Even though it had more fields and it had more things, it was pretty easy to incorporate it. So we just published that. Of course, we're working in new projects. But it's true, I have to tell you, that we work on 1 or 2 projects a year. So we've are already kind of covered for the rest of the year.
Do you have any personal concerns about releasing personally identifiable information like home addresses and whatnot, people who, like you said, false positives, they're innocent people who have no malevolent purpose?
Right. So if you log into the database, or if you go into offshoreleaks.icij.org, for the first time you would get a disclaimer that is not showing now, but that I'm going to show you because it's in every page, thanks to our lawyer, that says, there are legitimate users for offshore companies and trusts. We do not intend to suggest or imply that any persons, companies, or other entities included in the ICIJ Offshore Leaks database have broken the law. It's longer, you can read it later. So first, we're not implying that anybody is doing anything illegal. Second, there's a legal argumentation why my lawyer allowed me to publish all this data. By the way, one of the reasons why it allowed us to publish all this data is because we are in the US. It would probably have been a different story if we were a European media organization. But there is a lot of evidence and a lot of justification from experts, NGOs, even the World Bank, that says that corporate registries should be public because it's public information that should be out there. The problem is that offshore jurisdictions, tax havens, do not have public corporate registries. Let me give you the example of the Bahamas. If you want to look up companies in the Bahamas, you can go into the website, it's public. You need a login, so you need to email them. Sometimes they reply to you with a login, sometimes they don't. If you're lucky and you get a login, you can only search by company names. So when does an investigation start with a company name? Very rarely, right? Then, if you know the company name, you enter the company name, you have to pay, and then you get the directors. Sometimes, even then, you don't get all the records, like it happened in the case of the former Vice President of the European Commission. So that doesn't help. That is secrecy. So actually, we actually thought that there was enough evidence from, again, NGOs and experts and even the World Bank has a great report called the Puppet Masters that speaks about this, that led to us having a great justification as to why corporate registry information should be public. And that's what we published. And that's why we only published the corporate data or the corporate registry data, and that's why we didn't publish the 11.5 million files of the Panama Papers, because it had bank accounts, it had passports, etc. And unless any of you tell me when we get out that there's a system out there to go through 11.5 million documents and review them and tell me that it's bulletproof, that there's no personal data, I'm not going to be exposing that to the public. Yeah?
All right. So this is maybe sort of tangentially related to what you just said about systems to go through all that stuff. Do you have tools for improving the quality of this data, cleaning up the dirty data? And do you make available to any outsiders the cleaned up data? And also, as you're dealing with these different registries like Bahamas versus Panama versus Seychelles, are you sort of cross-correlating the whole thing, or are these each freestanding data sets?
So one of the ways we got our lawyer to allow us to publish this data was to leave the data as it was received by the ICIJ without any cleaning. Having said that, we did use some algorithms to try to find maybe names of people that had same name and same address, and that were like with some high frequency similarity, right? And in those cases, we did aggregate or deduplicate those cases. But the majority of cases, we did not clean the data because of legal reasons. There's actually one added problem, which is that officers in the data that we received did not have unique identifiers. So Mar CABRA could appear many times, and if Mar CABRA doesn't have the same address, the 7 times that she appears, then she appears as 7 different nodes. We didn't do it on purpose. We have done some internal cleaning. There's no way we can publish that on the internet. But there are efforts out there to clean up the data. And one of the kind of like things we would like to do in the future for future projects is organize the community a bit more so that it's the community that does it and that they are kind of like organized in a way so that you can benefit from each other's work. We didn't have time to do that this time. Thank you.
Sorry, are you tying different rates?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So actually right now you can search by jurisdiction. And for example, if you search Bahamas, I don't know, I have an example from the top of my head, but if you search Bahamas and the same entity was in the Panama Papers incorporating Bahamas by Mossack Fonseca, and we had it in the Bahamas Leaks, which is the case of many of them, then we actually did create a suggested link that says same company as, or possibly same company as. That's also one of the reasons why our schema is a bit more complex, is because there are a lot of, and that's why we have more than 4 million nodes, is because a lot of those nodes are similarities or suggesting connections. In Bahamas, it was very easy to do because in both cases we had the ID of the company, the internal ID of the company from the registry. But in some other cases, we actually suggested links based on, again, on similar name, possibly the same person. So there are some similarities. And that's the reason why there are so many nodes, so many relationships, sorry. Okay, well, I think I ended up on time, and I'll be around if you have more questions. Thank you.